Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another lecture for Psychology, Psych 9, Developmental Psychology. Tonight, we're going to look at our third portion of Chapter 5, Emotional and Social Development. We're going to take a look at the emotional development in toddlerhood, attachment theory and research, and the social world of the toddler. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. Okay. Emotional self-regulation is something that is developed or begins to develop in toddlerhood. Infants show emotions and toddlers continue to show their emotions. However, during toddlerhood, they learn to control and regulate those emotions, at least to some degree. How do they do this? How do they learn emotional self-regulations? They do this through several avenues. The first one is through behaviors. For example, when they are frightened, they run to a trusted person, cling to a blanket or a stuffed animal, and find a way to feel soothed, comforted, and less frightened. That is one way they've learned to self-regulate, is to either run to the person or do one of these things that brings them comfort. The use of language. Our toddlers are starting to use words in order to express their feelings. They are going to be able to express when they are afraid, when they're hungry, when they're upset, angry, and they can do that by using language. They can also learn emotional self-regulation by developing an understanding of the rules for the society or the household that they live in. For example, if you're angry, you can't just hit somebody. You're not allowed to just jump on the table if you're happy. So whatever the culture or the living situation demands, those rules start to become understood by the toddler, and that helps them to emotionally regulate. They want to do the right thing. Development of socio-moral emotions occurs at this time as well, and I alluded to them in a previous lecture, I believe in infancy, but some of these socio-moral emotions are things like guilt, shame, and embarrassment. And the way these socio-moral emotions are used varies based on culture. Here's a question for you guys. Tantrums. Tantrums and the terrible twos are unavoidable. Is this true or is this false? I'll give you a minute to think about it. True or false? The answer is it kind of depends on where you live. The terrible twos are a cultural phenomenon. They are not universal. They are a consequence of Western culture like the UK and the US. These cultures value self-expression, and they are viewed by some as inevitable based on this individualistic culture that values self-expression. African and Asian cultures do not have a phase called the terrible twos. Their toddlers have already learned to control their emotions per the cultural expectations. So it is not inevitable that a child is going to have these 2-year-old tantrums. It just depends on the society and the culture in which they live and the environment in which they live. There are definite cultural differences in the expression of emotions. Learning the socio-moral emotions, primary emotions are displayed by infants across cultures. That's something we see that's pretty darn universal. The secondary or socio-emotional emotions seen in toddlerhood include guilt, shame, embarrassment, envy, and pride, and it's based on cultural standards. What is viewed as right within the culture, what is viewed as wrong within the culture. And this, of course, varies. A child, if they're doing what is viewed as right within the culture, they're going to feel good about themselves. If they're doing something that is viewed as wrong within the culture, they're going to not feel good about themselves. Developing a conscious and moral standards is the guide to behavior in the children. Pro-social behavior. Pro-social behavior is intended to benefit others, and we see toddlers already beginning to exhibit beginnings of pro-social behavior. They are already starting to exhibit empathy, which is an understanding of self as a separate from others. In other words, when one of the friends gets hurt or cries, instead of just crying also, for example, with emotional contagion, like we saw with the infants, this child might pat the crying child on the shoulder and try to give some support. They are feeling empathetic. They understand that they are separate from this other person who is crying and upset, and they can offer support. That's the beginning of that pro-social behavior. They're no longer just responding with emotional contagion. They have a sense of self that is separate from others, and this develops in the second and third year. Some of those cultural differences that we were alluding to, for pride and shame, there are some definite differences. In Western cultures, pride is viewed as positively. It's great to be prideful, feel good about yourself for your accomplishments. Shame is applied with caution in Western cultures because it is believed that feeling ashamed or shameful will damage the self-esteem of the individual. And of course, this is based on our Western individualistic culture. Non-Western cultures that are more of a collectivist type of society, pride is not valued. That individual accomplishment does not hold as much value because doing and being successful for the group is what matters more than for the individual. Shame is taught to encourage the consideration of others. So there are examples where children might be scolded and shamed or taught to feel shame when they have not considered others. This is to help them prepare for collectivist society. So these socio-moral emotions are valued differently, taught differently, and promoted differently within different cultures. During this 2- and 3-year-old period, our little guys are starting to develop a sense of self. This advances significantly in toddlerhood. Late infancy is when we see this sense of self occurring, where they can identify that they are a separate person. If you sit them in front of a mirror, a very young infant will not recognize themselves in the mirror, or they will touch the face of the baby in the mirror, maybe talk to the baby in the mirror. And there was some interesting experiments done where what you do is they put a red dot on the child's nose. So you can see here, this infant has this little guy, late infancy, early toddler, has a dot on his nose. And before the child has a clear sense of self-recognition and a clear sense of self, when they look in the mirror and they see this dot on the nose of the baby in the mirror, they may reach over and touch the baby's nose in the mirror, and then just kind of pat the mirror or talk to the baby in the mirror. When the child has a sense of self and they're developing this sense of individuality and self, you can see what happened is in this bottom picture. They will look at the baby in the mirror, maybe touch that baby's nose, and then realize, oh, that's my nose. And then they touch their own nose. They'll touch their own nose and see that they are touching the red dot on their nose. We will notice at this point in time that the child will start saying things like I, me, and mine. And they think of themselves as an individual. And once again, some of this is influenced by the culture in which they live. Gender identity is a big thing that we are talking about these days. Our understanding of gender identity is greatly growing at this time. Children begin to identify as male or female during toddlerhood, and once again, our culture is going to have a big influence on this. Sex is the biological status of being male or female. Gender is a cultural category of male or female, or a cultural category which is more broad than that these days. Culture communicates gender expectations. For example, what you are supposed to do if you're a boy, what you're supposed to do if you're a girl. In some research done by Sidrowitz and Looney in 1998, or Linné in 1998, they did an experiment where they took a baby and dressed the baby up as a boy, and then they filmed how the other adults that interacted with this baby, how they behaved, what toys they choose, what, you know, how they interact with this baby if they're told that the baby is a boy. Then they put the same baby in pink and dressed it as a girl. And then they watched interaction with the adults that come and interact with this baby as a girl. And what they found was that there were huge differences in how adults interacted with the child based on whether or not they were told it was a boy or a girl. Same baby, but wildly different behaviors based on whether the child was perceived as a male or a female. There are 3 biological bases to gender development. From an evolutionary perspective, we can say that males have been more aggressive and competitive and dominant in order to win over females. We see this in the animal kingdom, and we believe that this has been a trait that's true in humans as well. Females have a tendency to be more nurturing, cooperative, and emotionally responsive, things that are needed to rear young. Ethology, animal behavior, shows evidence of biology. So we see these same things happening with animals than we do with humans. We also know that hormonal balances can cause differences in gender, or gender expression, how somebody is expressing. For example, if a female, while during certain times of prenatal development, is exposed to higher levels of androgens, they might come out and show more predisposition to play with boy toys or be more of a tomboy. Similarly, research shows that if a male child is exposed to high levels of estrogens, and remember, androgens are male hormones, estrogens are female-related hormones. Both males and females have both of these hormones, but androgens relate to more males and estrogens more to females. So if a male is exposed to high levels of estrogen, they might come out and be more apt to play with female toys. So we have seen some differences based on hormonal levels. However, the biggest factor in influencing gender socialization across cultures would be cultural constructs. In other words, what is the role for somebody who is born as a female? What is somebody's role who is born as a male? Biology does not explain all the gender differences. They cannot all be chalked up to biology. And recently, we see a greater diversity in gender roles. We see men and women doing jobs that may have been traditionally men doing things that might have been traditionally women's work, women doing jobs that might have been traditionally men's work. So our culture continues to grow and evolve, and our understanding of gender roles and gender identities continues to grow and expand with this. A lot of differences that have been attributed to sex in the past have been found to be gender-based. For example, women were not thought to be able to do hard labor or get sweaty and things like that because they were just not able to do that. That was the belief. We know now that that's not true. There's variability within genders greater than between genders. What that means is there's a lot of, you take a whole bunch of women and you're going to see a great deal of variation from one woman to the next. You take just a bunch of men, you're going to see a huge variation between all these different men. There are going to be a lot of differences between them. And those differences are greater than just a general difference between men and women. All right, We're going to talk now about attachment theories. Attachment is thought of as the emotional tie between children and caregivers, and it is historically thought to be driven by a reduction in a distressing physical state. In other words, mom provides food, reducing distressing physical state of hunger, and so the baby gets food, and that is the basis for the attachment. And the provides pleasurable state. In other words, eating and not being hungry is a pleasurable state. A researcher came along named John Bowlby, and he took a look at some studies, and he kind of considered these ideas and thought, I don't think that's right. I don't think that attachment between a mom and the baby only occurs because the mother is providing food for that child. He took a look at 3 main studies that led to his own ideas. Renee Spitz did a study looking at institutionalized infants with adequate physical care. So we saw that horrible Romanian orphanage study where the kids did not have adequate food, they did not have adequate social interaction, all that kind of stuff. And we did see that they recovered physically from these things. This particular study was done in institutions where the infants were provided with adequate physical care. They had enough food, they were given what they needed physically to survive. However, they found that these children still lost weight and seemed depressed. And this researcher called it Anaclitic Depression. Anaclitic meaning like leaning upon. They were depressed because they had nobody to lean on or depend on. There was a lack of positive feelings. These children were being provided with the physical care, but without the emotional nurturing that they needed. So looking at this study, John Bowlby said, okay, well, their physical needs were met, but they were still not seeming to be happy, well-adjusted kids. Then he took a look at this study by Harry Harlow that took a look at baby monkeys, and we're going to take a look at that one. And he looked at a study from Conrad Lorenz, and who looked at some ways that animals bonded with their mothers. All right, so we're going to start with Harry Harlow's study. In Harry Harlow's study, this is one of those studies that is the reason why we have these institutional review boards, because we could never do a study like this today because it is very cruel to the animals. However, we did learn a lot, and as we learn and develop as a species, we learn to understand the needs of other species. And back when this research was done, we didn't really realize how damaging this type of thing was to this type of research when we go over it, the negative impact it was going to have on these animals. So the way that this worked was these little baby rhesus monkeys were separated from their mother at birth. So these babies were raised with a cloth monkey, which is this cloth one that the baby's clinging to, and they had wire monkey. Wire mom and cloth mom. So wire mom provided food. They would have a bottle in this monkey here, and then this one just has the cloth. And I think it might have had warmth too. And what the hypothesis was behind this was that the infant was going to need more than just the nutrition. So what they found was that these little infant monkeys would just reach over, eat their food, and they get right back to the cloth monkey. They wanted that warmth and support. So Harlow's studies demonstrated that attachments were not based on nourishment, but they preferred, it was that warmth and contact and kind of nurturing is what they needed, that feeling of safety. So these poor little guys, after this experiment, if they were bred, they were not able to raise their babies because these are social animals. They are needing to grow up in groups. When they did put these animals back in with groups, they did not learn to socialize as youngsters, so they were not able to adequately integrate into their groups. So they would become anxious, pull their hair out, all kinds of stuff these poor little guys went through. I mean, we learned a lot from this study, but we can't do studies like this anymore. And there's reasons why now, because we understand more than we did back then. Anyway, so the basis is that we found this particular study was saying that it's not the nutrition. This baby's clinging to this cloth monkey. If it was just about food, this baby would be clinging to the one with the bottle. And the third study that was considered by Bobley was Conrad Lorenz's study. Conrad Lorenz was a German ethologist. He studied animals, and he studied relationships between baby animals and the mothers. And what he discovered was something called imprinting, that birds, a lot of birds, and he worked specifically with like ducks and geese, bonded with their mom for protection. These mother geese are not nursing these babies, so they're not, drinking from them or anything. And he learned that they stay with the adult for the protection. And he also discovered, as you can see from these pictures, that these little animals, these geese, will imprint on the first thing that they see. And by imprinting, it means that they kind of latch on mentally to this image. So if the first thing they see when they hatch out of their egg is a golden retriever, that golden retriever is now their mother. And they will think it's their mother, and they will follow this dog anywhere. And that's what happened with him. These are his goslings that followed him everywhere. These are his goslings right here. These guys imprinted on him. And interestingly, this imprinting, and I might have talked about this before, this imprinting led to a lot of positive changes, because it was thought initially that humans would imprint the same way, that if you didn't bond with that baby immediately, you wouldn't get this imprinting to occur, and there would be a bad relationship between the mother and the child. That allowed for some policy changes with hospitals and things that led to good things. However, humans do not imprint. That's something we know now. So he took a look at all these studies, and he said, he concluded that attachment is an emotional bond that promotes protection and survival. There is a primary attachment figure involved. The attachment style has an evolutionary base, or attachment has an evolutionary base of survival. And that is where this stranger anxiety comes from. So at about 6 months, we know that human babies start getting stranger anxiety, and that is kind of a evolutionary protective type of thing, according to Bobley. So he was not an experimenter, but he was a theorist. So these are the studies that he kind of looked at to come up with his own idea that, hey man, it's not just food, there's a lot more to it. Mary Ainsworth, who was a student of his, devised something called the strange situation. The strange situation was a test, a laboratory test that she had designed in order to assess how well attachment was formed between the primary caregiver and the infant. In these studies, it was moms that were used, because oftentimes moms are the primary caregiver. We know now that it doesn't have to just be the mom, it can be the primary person. Whoever is the main person that cares for this baby, that would be the primary caregiver that's forming the attachment. So what they did is they did the strange situation task where, and I will link a video to strange situation task on the Canvas page, because I have a short video about it. The researcher, okay, so the mom and baby go into a room that has a lot of toys. Mom sits down, baby will, kind of wander around and take a look at the toys and things and kind of check in with mom, and then wander around, look at more toys. A stranger comes into the room. The stranger tries to interact with the child. Child usually kind of gets back over to mom. Mom leaves the room, and the stranger is in with the room and tries to comfort the child. Child usually kind of wigs out. And then mom returns, and then the baby, if it's securely attached, has a secure attachment, mom comforts the baby calms down pretty quickly and can go back to exploring and playing in the room. This is a very brief summary of the research, and I will attach a video that will explain it better. It's just a little clip, a video clip of the actual experiment that I will attach for you. There are 4 attachment classifications that she came up with. The secure attachment is the attachment that was seen most frequently. And this is a secure attachment, meaning that baby seemed to, or this toddler, it was toddlers that they used. This toddler was comfortable with their mom. They would use them for what's called a secure base, meaning that you check in with mom, but you're okay to go do stuff. And when something seems funky, you might look at mom. As long as mom seems like it's okay, then you're okay. And then when mom left, one of the things they measured is the reuniting of the child and the mother. And there was 2 different situations where the mom returned, and they would measure the responses of that child to the mom when she returns. A securely attached child is going to cling to mom, calm down pretty quickly, and then be all right. An insecure or avoidant attachment, in this particular case, the child would either not care that mom left the room, even because a securely attached child will usually cry when mom leaves the room and then be calmed by her when she gets back. The insecure or avoidant attachment child would be oftentimes not really care if mom left, or if the child did cry when mom went to go pick up the child would avoid mom, pull the head away, push mom away, that sort of thing. Another type of insecure attachment would be resistant, where the child might push or kick mom, maybe try to hug for a second, then kick and push away mom. Similar type of thing, where it is an insecure attachment with the mom. Neither of those children would be easily calmed back down. And then we have disorganized or disoriented attachment, which is a rare type of attachment. In this particular situation, the child may either ignore mom, or may be picked up with mom, or may hug mom and then kick mom or look away from mom, or the child might completely, do something else more bizarre. So disorganized and disoriented attachment just doesn't fit these other patterns. And I guess I do have this link, but we're not going to go ahead and watch this because this video is already long enough. Determinants of attachment quality. So what forms a good attachment between mother and infant, or primary caregiver and infant? Maternal sensitivity, or caregiver sensitivity, what a child needs at any given time. So being able to understand what that child needs would be one factor that develops good attachment. Responsiveness, maternal or paternal, depending on who is raising this child. Quick to assist or soothe when needed. Internal working model develops. So what that means is the child develops a understanding of what to expect from their caregiver. If their caregiver is trustworthy and predictable, the child will develop a secure attachment. If the caregiver is untrustworthy and unpredictable in meeting these needs that we just discussed, then there will be an insecure type of attachment. This is just a image here, attachment quality and later development. There are some links about attachment quality and later development. There are some links to later development. At least research is mixed about this. It does seem that certain types of attachment can indicate problems later on. For example, this disorganized type of attachment does seem predictive of later problems. It is believed in some circumstances that these types of attachment patterns can apply to later relationships. So there is mixed reviews on this. It does seem that even if somebody has very bad attachment early on, and they have an insecure attachment or a bad attachment early on, that through good relationships later, that can be overcome. Bowlby, however, suggested that no, this is the model you're going to have for every attachment in your life. All right, critiques of attachment theory. Children are born with different temperaments, as we talked about previously. And that influence is bidirectional. So if you have a difficult temperament child and somebody who's uptight, that's going to be a very difficult two-way relationship, and it's going to be difficult to develop a good attachment that way. Cultural critique. Attachments are recognizable across cultures, but they may vary on parenting styles. And I don't know if I have the charts in here, but we'll see. There are different types of attachments. For example, one society or one culture may be high in one particular type of insecure attachment compared to another. So there are some definite yet kind of slight variations on those parenting styles that affect that. Okay, and yeah, may vary on classifying insecurity. Okay, I already just covered all that. All right, and I don't have the chart in here. So you can look at that in your book, though. If you're interested, you can look that chart up in your book. Fathers in traditional cultures. Fathers have limited involvement in most traditional cultures. They are a provider, you know, go out and get the food, the meat, whatever, and they're disciplinarian. They can oftentimes be warm as well. In Latin America, they are often providers and warm and affectionate towards their children. In a lot of African cultures, we see polygamy, which is more than one wife. So the father may be a little bit more remote because depending on how it works, they may spend time with different, you know, usually the woman and her children live in their own household, and then the father may come to visit wife 1 and then go visit wife 2 the next week and wife 3 the next week. So that's just kind of a different way that things are done. Polygamy is becoming more rare. Sometimes the fathers in traditional cultures are very remote from emotional lives. However, there are some notable differences. When in this Aka hunter-gatherer group, they spend a lot of time with their infants. So the fathers in this particular culture spend a lot of time with the infants, and the Manus people take over childcare and toddlerhood. The men take over the childcare and toddlerhood, take them with them on their boats, take them fishing. So it just depends on the culture. But for the most part, fathers in traditional cultures don't really become involved with those kids until it's time for them to start learning skills that are traditionally male skills. Fathers in developed countries, they tend to interact less and play. They interact less when it comes to care, but they play more with the child. They actually have more interaction than traditional cultures. They tend to be more flexible in recent years than in previous times. Parenting is a learned skill that is not innate. It's something that has to be learned. Although there's some really fascinating research that I saw about men, and actually there are biological changes that a man goes through in pregnancy. And some of their hormones will actually change during pregnancy. And I'll probably put some links to that for you guys as well. Anyway, American fathers, let's see, have 85, let's see, how does this work? Okay, 1/3 of American toddlers live with single mothers and have non-resident fathers that are less involved. American fathers, 85% of American fathers spend significant time with their children. 75% of Canadian fathers spend significant time with their children. In Scandinavian countries, they have some interesting laws for maternity leave. So you get a year off for maternity leave if you're a woman, and you get 80 to 100% of your wages as well. In addition, you can have extended time for the father to also have bonding time with the child. So both parents get this kind of extended leave for bonding with their children, and they get it with pay. Siblings, younger and older. Okay, and in traditional cultures, older siblings may be responsible for caring for the younger siblings. We've kind of covered that in a lot of different areas. Older siblings can provide emotional comfort and security if primary parent is not around. And that's an important thing. Older siblings can be very useful for the younger children. Younger siblings can lead to negative consequences, including attachment changes and increased aggressiveness. A child who was securely attached to their primary caregiver, oftentimes, if another baby shows up during toddlerhood, their secure attachment may change to an insecure attachment. Also, you may see increased aggression. The parent is often less responsive to the toddler while they're juggling the care of a new infant with the care of the toddler. Parents can help by giving special attention to that toddler, some special time just for that child, and conflict is more common in siblings than any other relationships. So oftentimes you can see there's jealousy of the new baby, and toddlers often react negatively to the birth of a younger sibling. So she's pinching his little face. In toddlerhood, children start having peer relationships, and peer interactions can be understood by different types of play. There's solitary play where they play by themselves. There's parallel play where you would have two toddlers sitting in the same room, maybe doing the same activity, but not playing with each other, just doing their own thing next to each other. There's simple social play, and this is something that is started in toddlerhood where they talk and smile and share together. And there's cooperative pretend play involving shared fantasy, where they might come up with a story together to play with their animals or their dolls or their trucks or whatever. Research indicates that friendships form from play. We're going to talk briefly about autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum, let's talk about features of this diagnosis. Deficits in social relations and communication. This particular disorder disrupts social functioning greatly. There's repetitive and restricted behaviors. In other words, they like to do repeated things, and there's only a smaller range of behaviors that oftentimes kids with autism will perform. And it may or may not include a language impairment. Autism spectrum disorder is just that, is on a spectrum. You may have a very severely autistic child that does not have any language or any means of communication. You may have somebody who's milder, who can have eye contact, who can have communication and can speak and do things like that. Prevalence of autism spectrum disorder, 1 in 68 in US fit the criteria for autistic spectrum disorder. There used to be some different categories that have all been kind of lumped into the autism spectrum disorder now. And so that spectrum, like once again, the mild end, you might have somebody who just seems a bit quirky, socially a little bit quirky, but is functional, can have a job, all that kind of stuff. And then you can have the other end, where it's somebody that'll have to be cared for their whole life because they cannot speak or perform certain tasks. The rates are consistent across Asia, Europe, and North America. One country doesn't seem to have more than another. The origins are unclear. There is a possible genetic link, but it's uncertain. There is a possible link to air pollution or pollutions that is being kicked around these days. There are no links to vaccinations or diet. So there was a doctor that came out and did a research or did a paper, a fraudulent paper, saying that autism was due to vaccinations. That information was incorrect. It was not true. His paper, they rescinded that paper. In other words, they called it back and they printed something saying that this was not true, this was a mistake, and this doctor lost his license. However, the myth has prevailed, and people still think that these vaccinations cause autism, but it is not true. Autism is often diagnosed in toddlerhood. It can sometimes be seen in infancy. Early intervention may improve functioning. So the earliest you get a diagnosis and the earliest is that you get some intervention, it can really help the functioning of that child. Interestingly, they're starting to do some research with eye tracking in infancy, watching how the infant tracks its mother's movement in the room. And these are some even earlier indicators that we may have autism present when they see that the child does not track well with that. And our last slide is about media use. 73% of toddlers watch TV every day. They use digital devices for an average of 58 minutes daily. This can encourage pro-social behavior. In other words, watching shows where you see a toddler acting pro-socially can promote good behavior. There doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence of the negative stuff. However, displacement is a concern. In other words, sitting a child in front of a TV for hours to watch educational television is not a substitute for sitting there with that child, reading a book, playing with them, speaking with them, singing with them, and spending that one-on-one face-to-face time. So that's where displacement is a concern. And the pro-social themes promote pro-social behavior. I guess I have that in there more than once. All right, that's it. We're going to call it a day on this one. And I hope you guys have a good day. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.